Sciacademy GS Research Center presents audiobook of history for class 6 entitled Our Pasts 1. This is page number 46, chapter 5, Kingdoms, Kings and an Early Republic. Election day, Sankaran wake up to see his grandparents all ready to go and vote. They wanted to be the first to reach the polling booth. Why? Sankaran wanted to know. Were they so excited? Somewhat impatiently, his grandfather explained, "We can choose our own rulers to how some men became rulers. Choosing leaders or rulers by voting is something that has become common during the last 50 years or so. How did men become rulers in the past? Some of the Rajas we read about in chapter 4 were probably chosen by the Jan, that is the people. But around 3000 years ago, we find some changes taking place in the ways in which Rajas were chosen. Some men now became recognized as Rajas by performing very big sacrifices. The Ashwamedha or horse sacrifice was one such ritual. A horse was let loose to wander freely, and it was guarded by the Raja's men. If the horse wandered into the kingdoms of other Rajas and they stopped it, they had to fight. If they allowed the horse to pass, it meant that they accepted that the Raja who wanted to perform the sacrifice was stronger than them. These Rajas were then invited to the sacrifice, which was performed by specially trained priests who were rewarded with the gifts. The Raja who organized the sacrifice was recognized as being very powerful, and all those who came brought gifts for him. The Raja was a central figure in these rituals. He often had a special seat, a throne, or a tiger charioteer who was his companion in the battlefield and witnessed his exploits, chanted tales of his glory. His relatives, especially his wives and sons, had to perform a variety of minor rituals. The other Rajas were simply spectators who had to sit and watch the performance of the sacrifice. Priests performed the rituals, including the sprinkling of sacred water on the king. The ordinary people, the Vis or Vaishya, also brought gifts. However, some people, such as those who were regarded as Sudras by the priests, were excluded from many rituals. Make a list of all those who would be present at the sacrifice, which are the categories that are described in terms of their occupation. Varnas. We have many books that were composed in North India, especially in the areas drained by the Ganga and the Jamuna during this period. These books are often called later Vedic because they were composed after the Rig Veda, about which you learnt in chapter 4. These include the Samved, Yajurved, Atharved, as well as other books. These were composed by priests and described how rituals were to be performed. They also contained rules about society. There were several different groups in society at this time: priests and warriors, farmers, herders, traders, craft persons, laborers, fishing folk, and forest people. Some priests and warriors rich, as were some farmers and traders. Others, including many herders, crafts, persons, laborers, fishing folk, and hunters and gatherers, were poor. The priests divided people into four groups called Varnas. According to them, each Varna had a different set of functions. The first Varna was that of the Brahmin. Brahmins were expected to study and teach the Vedas, perform sacrifices, and receive gifts. In the second place were the rulers, also known as Kshatriyas. They were expected to fight battles and protect people. Third were the Vis or the Vaisyas. They were expected to be farmers, herders, and traders. Both the Kshatriyas and the Vaisyas could perform sacrifices. Last were the Sudras, who had to serve the other three groups and could not perform any rituals. Often women were also grouped with the Sudras. Both women and Sudras were not allowed to study the Vedas. The priests also said that these groups were decided on the basis of birth. For example, if one's father and mother were Brahmins, one would automatically become a Brahmin, and so on. Later, they classified some people as untouchable. These included some craft persons, hunters, and gatherers, as well as people who helped perform burials and cremations. These priests said that contact with these groups was polluting. Many people did not accept the system of Varna laid down by the Brahmins. Some kings thought they were superior to the priests. Others felt that birth could not be a basis for deciding which Varna people belonged to. Besides, some people felt that there should be no differences among us people based on occupation. Others felt that everybody should be able to perform rituals, and others condemned the practice of untouchability. Also, there were many areas in the subcontinent, such as the Northeast, where social and economic differences were not very sharp and where the influence of the priest was limited. Why did people oppose the system of Varnas? Janpadas. The Rajas who performed these big sacrifices were now recognized as being Rajas of Janpadas rather than Janas. The word Janpada literally means the land where the Jan set its foot and settled down. Some important Janpadas are shown on map 4, page 49. Archaeologists have excavated a number of settlements in these Janpadas, such as Purana Kila in Delhi, Hastinapur near Meerut, and Atanji near Etah. The last two are in Uttar Pradesh. They found that people lived in huts and kept cattle as well as other animals. They also grew a variety of crops: rice, wheat, barley, pulses, sugarcane, sesame, and mustard. Is there a crop in this list that was not mentioned in chapter 3 previously? Painted grey ware. The plates and bowls are the most common vessels made out of painted grey ware. These are extremely fine to touch with a nice smooth surface. Perhaps these were used on special occasions for important people and to serve special food. They made earthen pots. Some of these were grey in color, others were red. One special type of pottery found at these sites is known as painted grey ware. As is obvious from the name, these grey pots had painted designs, usually simple lines and geometric patterns. Mahajanpadas. About 2500 years ago, some Janpadas became more important than others and were known as Mahajanpadas. Some of these are map 4. Most Mahajanpadas had a capital city. Many of these were fortified. This means that huge walls of wood, brick, or stone were built around them. Forts were probably built because people were afraid of attacks from other kings and needed protection. It is also likely that some rulers wanted to show how rich and powerful they were by building really large, tall, and impressive walls around their cities. Also, in this way, the land and the people living inside the fortified area could be controlled more easily by the king. Building such huge walls required a great deal of planning. Thousands, if not lakhs of bricks or stones had to be prepared. This in turn meant enormous labor provided possibly by thousands of men, women, and children, and resources had to be found for all this. The fortification wall at Kosambi. This is a picture of remains of a wall made of brick found near present-day Allahabad. A part of it was probably built about 2500 years ago. The new Rajas now began maintaining armies. Soldiers were paid regular salaries and maintained by the king throughout the year. Some payments were probably made using punch marked coins. See the illustration on page 84. You will read more about these coins in chapter 8. List two ways in which the Rajas of the Mahajanpadas were different from those mentioned in the Rigveda. Taxes. As the rulers of the Mahajanpadas were building huge forts, maintaining big armies, they needed more resources and they needed officials to collect these. So instead of depending on occasional gifts brought by people, as in the case of the Rajas of the Janpadas, they started collecting regular taxes. Taxes on crops were the most important. This was because most people were farmers. Usually, the tax was fixed at one-sixth of what was produced. This was known as bhaga or share. There were taxes on crafts, persons as well. These could have been in the form of labor. For example, a weaver or a smith may have had to work for a day every month for the king. Herders were also expected to pay taxes in the form of animals and animal produce. There were also taxes on goods that were bought and sold through trade, and hunters and gatherers also had to provide forest produce to the Rajas. What do you think would have been provided by hunters and gatherers? Changes in agriculture. There were two major changes in agriculture around this time. One was the growing use of iron plowshares. This meant that heavy clayey soil could be turned over better than with a wooden plowshare, so that more grain could be produced. Second, people began transplanting paddy. This meant that instead of scattering seed on the ground from which plants would sprout, saplings were grown and then planted in the fields. This led to increased production as many more plants survived. However, it was back-breaking work. Generally, slave men and women, dasa and dasis, and landless agricultural laborers, kamkaras, had to do this work. Can you think why kings would encourage these changes. A closer look. Magad. Find Magad on map 4, page 49. Magad became the most important Mahajanpada in about 200 years. Many rivers, such as the Ganga and Son, flowed through the Magad. This was important for transport, water supplies, making the land fertile. Parts of Magad were forested. Elephants, which lived in the forest, could be captured and trained for the army. Forests also provided wood for building houses, carts, and chariots. Besides these, there were iron ore mines in the region that could be tapped to make strong tools and weapons. Magad had two very powerful rulers, Bimbisar and Ajatasattu, who used all possible means to conquer other Janpadas. Mahapadma Nanda was another important ruler. He extended his control up to northwest part of the subcontinent. Rajgriha, present-day Rajgir in Bihar, was the capital of Magad for several years. Later, the capital was shifted to Patliputra, present-day Patna. More than 2300 years ago, a ruler named Alexander, who lived in Macedonia in Europe, wanted to become a world conqueror. Of course, he did not conquer the world, but did conquer parts of Egypt and West Asia, and came to the Indian subcontinent, reaching up to the banks of the Bias. When he wanted to march further eastwards, his soldiers refused. They were scared, as they had heard that rulers of India had vast armies of foot soldiers, chariots, and elephants. In what ways were these armies different from those described in the Rig Veda? A closer look. Vaji. While Magad became a powerful kingdom, Baji, with its capital at Vaisali, present day in Bihar, was under a different form of government known as Gana or Sangha. In a Gana or Sangha, there were not one but many rulers. Sometimes, even when thousands of men ruled together, each one was known as Rajas. These Rajas performed rituals together. They also met in assemblies and decided what had to be done and how through discussion and debate. For example, if they were attacked by an enemy, they met to discuss what should be done to meet the threat. However, women, dasas, and kamkaras could not participate in these assemblies. Both the Buddha and Mahavir, about whom you will read in chapter 6, belong to Ganas or Sanghas. Some of the most vivid descriptions of life in the Sanghas can be found in Buddhist books. Gana is used for group that has many members. Sangha means organization or association. This is an account of the Bajis from the Digha Nikaya, a famous Buddhist book, which contains some of the speeches of Buddha. These were written down about 2300 years ago. Ajat and the Vajis. Ajat wanted to attack the Vajis. He sent his minister named Vasakara to the Buddha to get his advice on the matter. Buddha asked whether the Vajis met frequently in full assemblies. When he heard that they did, he replied that Vajis would continue to prosper as long as they held full and frequent public assemblies. They met and acted together. They followed established rules. They respected, supported, and listened to elders. Baji women were not held by force are captured. Chaityas, local shrines were maintained in both towns and villages. Wise saints who followed different beliefs were respected and allowed to enter and leave the country freely. In what ways was the Vaji Sangha different from the other Mahajanpadas? Try and list at least three differences. Rajas of powerful kingdoms tried to conquer the Sangha. Nevertheless, these lasted for a very long time, till about 1500 years ago, when the last of the Ganas or Sanghas were conquered by the Gupta rulers, about whom you will read in chapter 10. Elsewhere, find Greece and Athens in your atlas. Around 2500 years ago, the people of Athens set up a form of government which was called a democracy, which lasted for about 200 years. All free men over the age of 30 were recognized as full citizens. There was an assembly that met at least 40 times a year to decide on important matters. All citizens could attend these meetings. Appointments for many positions were made through lottery. All those who wanted to be chosen gave in their names, and then some were selected through lottery. Citizens were expected to serve in the army and in the navy. However, women were not considered citizens, and also many foreigners who lived and worked in Athens as merchants and crafts persons did not have rights as citizens. Besides, there were several thousand slaves in Athens who worked in mines, fields, households, and workshops. They too were not treated as citizens. Do you think this was a true democracy? Imagine you are peeping through a crack in the walls of the assembly of Vaisali, where a meeting is in progress to discuss ways to deal with an attack by the king of Magad. Describe what you might hear. Let's recall. First, state whether true or false. A. Rajas who let the Ashwamedha horse pass through their lands were invited to the sacrifice. B. Charioteer sprinkled sacred water on the king. C. Archaeologists have found palaces in the settlements of the Janpadas. D. Posts to store grain were made out of painted grayware. E. Many cities in Mahajanpadas were fortified. 2. Fill in the chart given below with terms hunter gatherers, farmers, traders, craft persons, herders. Some important dates. New kings, kinds of rajas about 3000 years ago. Mahajanpada about 2500 years ago. Alexander's invasion, composition of Digha Nikaya about 2300 years ago. End of the gun, Naj or Sanghas about 1500 years ago. 3. Who were the groups who could not participate in the assemblies of the Ganas discussed? 4. Why did the Rajas of Mahajanpadas build forts? 5. In what ways are present day elections different from the ways in which rulers were chosen in Janpadas? Let's do. 6. Were there any Janpadas in your state? If yes, name them. If not, name the Janpadas that would have been the closest to your state and mention whether they were to the east, west, north, or south. 7. Find out whether any of the groups mentioned in answer 2 pay taxes today. 8. Find out whether the groups mentioned in answer 3 have voting rights at present. This is chapter 5. Thank you.